You think some ghetto mechanic can fix what real engineers couldn't? Captain Sarah Thornton's voice cut through the morning air at Fort Braxton like a rusty blade. She deliberately kicked dirt onto Private Darius Mitchell's tools, watching them scatter across the concrete floor of the motor pool. The 28-year-old officer circled him like a predator sizing up prey. "Fine! Fix this engine, and I'll marry you right here on this base." Her laugh was sharp, mocking, but we both know that'll never happen. Every soldier in the maintenance bay froze. Phones appeared from pockets, fingers racing to record what was about to become the most explosive military moment of the year. The $2 million transport engine sat silent behind them, dead metal that threatened to derail a critical supply mission. Sarah leaned closer, her voice dripping with contempt. "Maybe stick to what your people are good at, carrying things, not thinking. Have you ever watched someone's prejudice become their biggest mistake? The tension in Fort Braxton's motor pool could have been cut with a bayonet." Captain Sarah Thornton's challenge hung in the air like diesel fumes on a hot Carolina morning, while Private Darius Mitchell stood motionless beside the massive Caterpillar C-15 engine that had brought the entire base to a standstill. This wasn't just any broken machine. The 15-liter beast powered the primary cargo transport for the 82nd Airborne Division, and its sudden death had thrown a wrench into tomorrow's critical resupply mission. 200 soldiers stationed overseas were counting on that delivery, medical supplies, ammunition, and equipment that could mean the difference between life and death. 4 master sergeants had already declared the engine totaled. 4 men with decades of experience, grease permanently embedded under their fingernails, and service records that read like mechanical poetry. Each had spent hours hunched over the silent metal, running diagnostics that came back clean, checking systems that should have worked but didn't. Master Sergeant Rodriguez wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. "Ma'am, we've tried everything. The fuel system's clean, electrical's good, compression's within spec. This thing just won't turn over." Sarah's eyes never left Darius. "And yet our resident genius here thinks he can succeed where you failed." The word genius dripped with sarcasm thick enough to choke on. Around them, off-duty soldiers began gathering like vultures circling roadkill. Word traveled fast on military bases, especially when it involved a captain making impossible promises to a private. Darius had been here before, not physically, but emotionally. The same dismissive glances, the same assumptions, the same casual cruelty wrapped in authority. At 22, he'd already learned that his voice carried less weight than his uniform suggested, that his ideas were filtered through the color of his skin before they reached anyone's ears. 3 weeks ago, he'd quietly suggested checking the fuel injection timing on a similar engine. The suggestion was brushed off with barely concealed irritation. 2 days later, that same timing issue caused a breakdown that cost the base 6 hours and $3,000 in emergency repairs. A month before that, he'd noticed unusual wear patterns on vehicle brake pads during routine maintenance. His observation was filed away and forgotten until 2 trucks failed inspection the following week, exactly as he'd predicted. The pattern was exhausting. Darius scored the highest marks in mechanical aptitude testing that the base had seen in 5 years. His written exam on engine systems earned a perfect score from instructors who'd been teaching mechanics since before he was born. Yet here he stood, assigned to infantry duty because someone in personnel had decided that's where he belonged. Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the motor pool. "Tell me, Mitchell, what makes you think you're smarter than Sergeant Rodriguez here? He's been fixing engines since you were in diapers." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. The master sergeant had quietly watched Darius work during maintenance duties, had seen the way the young man's hands moved with practiced confidence, and had heard the subtle questions that revealed deeper understanding than most gave him credit for. But the military hierarchy wasn't built for uncomfortable truths. "Captain," Rodriguez began carefully, "maybe we should..." "Should what?" Sarah's voice snapped like a whip. "Coddle him? Pretend that growing up in some Detroit garage makes him qualified to handle military equipment worth more than his entire neighborhood?" The racial undertones weren't subtle. They never were with Sarah. She'd grown up in a military family where rank and race had always seemed to align in convenient ways. Her father, Colonel James Thornton, had commanded respect through competence and connections that opened doors before he even knew they existed. Sarah had never questioned why those doors opened so easily for her family, or why they seemed locked for others. Success felt natural when you'd never truly been tested by failure, when your mistakes were called learning experiences and other people's expertise was dismissed as attitude problems. The base's social media channels were already buzzing. #marriage challenge started trending within minutes, shared by soldiers across multiple installations. Videos of Sarah's challenge spread like wildfire through military networks, carrying with them the uncomfortable weight of institutional tensions that usually stayed buried. Private Jackson, barely 19 and fresh from basic training, held his phone steady as he recorded. His grandmother had raised him in Alabama, had told him stories about promises made in anger and the terrible cost of pride. He sensed something historic unfolding, something that would be remembered long after their tours ended. Base Commander Colonel Williams watched from his office window, 3 floors above the motor pool. He'd received Sarah's after-action reports for months, had noted her efficiency ratings and her ability to maintain discipline. But he'd also received informal complaints from enlisted personnel, whispered concerns about favoritism and blind spots that seemed to follow racial lines. Williams had served for 28 years and had watched the military slowly evolve from the institution he'd joined as a young lieutenant. Progress came in fits and starts, often forced by incidents that exposed problems everyone knew existed but nobody wanted to address. He had a feeling today might be one of those days. Down in the motor pool, Sarah pulled out her phone and set a timer with exaggerated ceremony. 4 hours, Mitchell. 4 hours to prove that all your quiet confidence isn't just misplaced arrogance. She paused, her finger hovering over the start button. And when you fail, not if, when, you'll be transferred off this base permanently. Maybe find yourself somewhere more appropriate for your skill level. The threat was clear. Military transfers could make or break careers, could send promising soldiers to dead-end assignments where their potential withered like plants without sunlight. Sarah held that power, and she wasn't shy about wielding it. Darius finally spoke, his voice steady despite the weight of every eye in the motor pool. "And if I succeed, ma'am?" Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. "Then I honor my word. Marriage ceremony right here with all these witnesses." She gestured to the growing crowd. "But we both know that's not going to happen." The timer started with a soft beep that somehow sounded like a gunshot. Around them, the motor pool had transformed into an impromptu arena. Soldiers lined the walls, some cheering, others betting, all of them sensing that something larger than engine repair was about to be decided. The air crackled with anticipation and the kind of nervous energy that preceded either triumph or disaster. Master Sergeant Rodriguez caught Darius's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't official support, couldn't be given the circumstances, but it was acknowledgement. Recognition from one mechanic to another that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought with weapons. Sarah crossed her arms and settled in to watch what she was certain would be an expensive lesson in humility. She'd made her point about proper authority and natural order. Soon enough, everything would return to the way it should be. She had no idea that everything was about to change. Let me continue with the rest of this section to reach the target word count. The crowd continued to grow as word spread beyond the motor pool. Soldiers on break duty, administrative staff, even some officers drawn by curiosity and the magnetic pull of potential conflict. Captain Jennifer Walsh from the intelligence unit shook her head as she watched, recognizing the dangerous territory Sarah was navigating. Walsh had seen this before during her deployment in Afghanistan, moments when personal prejudice collided with military necessity, usually with explosive results. She pulled out her own phone, not to record the spectacle, but to document what might become an incident requiring official investigation. Near the back of the crowd, Specialist Marcus Thompson felt his stomach tighten. He'd grown up 3 blocks from Darius in Detroit, had watched his neighbor's mechanical genius transform broken-down cars into purring machines that ran better than factory fresh. Marcus knew what Sarah didn't, that she just challenged someone who could rebuild an engine blindfolded. But Marcus also knew the military's unwritten rules about staying in your lane, especially when officers made public declarations. Speaking up now could end his career before it really started. The weight of that silence pressed against his chest like a physical force. Dr. Elena Martinez, the base's chief maintenance inspector, arrived just as the timer hit 3 hours and 57 minutes remaining. As a civilian contractor, she operated outside the military hierarchy that kept others silent. Her job was ensuring equipment reliability, and she'd noticed patterns in maintenance reports that troubled her. Martinez had reviewed Darius's written work during certification testing. His understanding of hydraulic systems and electronic integration was graduate level, the kind of knowledge that typically took years to develop. She'd recommended him for advanced training programs twice, only to have her suggestions mysteriously stalled in bureaucratic paperwork. Now she watched him kneel beside the silent engine, his hands moving with careful precision as he began his examination. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just practiced competence that made her wonder how many other talented soldiers were being overlooked by a system more concerned with maintaining order than recognizing excellence. The Caterpillar C-15 engine dominated the center of the motor pool like a mechanical altar. 15 liters of displacement, 475 horsepower, and enough torque to haul a fully loaded transport through terrain that would stop lesser machines. In military configuration, it featured classified modifications that enhanced performance while meeting strict emissions standards. This particular engine had been the crown jewel of the motor pool's fleet, reliable and powerful until yesterday morning when it simply stopped. No warning signs, no gradual degradation, just sudden, complete failure that left the best mechanics scratching their heads. Sarah checked the timer. 3 hours, 55 minutes remaining. Plenty of time to watch confidence crumble into reality. She'd seen it before. Soldiers who talked big until faced with actual challenges that exposed their limitations. Today would be no different. Except something in Darius's posture suggested otherwise. He moved around the engine like a surgeon examining a patient, his eyes taking in details that others had missed. There was no panic, no desperate fumbling, just methodical assessment that spoke of deeper understanding. The crowd sensed it too. The initial laughter and casual betting had given way to focused attention. Even Sarah's most loyal supporters began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they were about to witness something unexpected. The first time Darius Mitchell held a wrench, he was 7 years old and standing on a milk crate in his father's garage on Detroit's east side. Marcus Mitchell Sr. had hands like leather and a reputation that stretched across 3 zip codes, the man who could resurrect any engine, no matter how far gone. "Listen here, son," Marcus had said, guiding Darius's small fingers around the handle of a socket wrench worn smooth by decades of use. "Every engine has a soul. You respect it, and it'll never let you down. You treat it like junk, and it'll leave you stranded on the coldest night of the year." The Mitchell family garage wasn't much to look at from the outside, a converted warehouse with roll-up doors that squealed like angry cats and fluorescent lights that flickered when the wind blew wrong. But inside, magic happened daily. City buses that other shops declared dead rolled out purring like satisfied cats. Police cruisers with mysterious ailments left running smoother than the day they rolled off the assembly line. Marcus didn't just fix engines, he understood them in ways that engineering textbooks couldn't capture. He could diagnose problems by sound alone, could feel mechanical distress through vibrations that traveled up through his fingertips. It was a gift passed down from his father, Master Sergeant Robert Washington, who'd kept Tuskegee Airmen's P-51 Mustangs flying when enemy fire and mechanical failure tried to ground them permanently. Darius absorbed those lessons like a sponge soaks up water. Summer afternoons found him elbow-deep in engine bays, learning to distinguish between the healthy rumble of proper timing and the subtle knock that warned of bearing failure. By age 12, he could tear down and rebuild a small block Chevy faster than most certified mechanics. But the family's mechanical gifts came with a price. When Marcus developed early-onset arthritis at 45, the garage's income dried up like motor oil in a cracked pan. Medical bills mounted faster than repair orders, and Darius watched his father struggle to maintain the business that had fed their family for 2 generations. The decision to enlist wasn't romantic or patriotic, it was mathematical. Military pay meant steady income, medical benefits, and the chance to send money home while learning skills that could translate to civilian success. Darius scored perfect marks on every mechanical aptitude test the Army offered, earning recommendations from instructors who called his understanding intuitive and exceptional. Yet somehow, those perfect scores led to an infantry assignment. Personnel specialists with clipboards and forms decided that his talents were better suited for carrying equipment than maintaining it. When Darius questioned the assignment, he was told that needs of the Army came before personal preferences. The explanation felt hollow, especially when he watched soldiers with lower test scores receive the technical assignments he'd requested. Pattern recognition was another skill his father had taught him, and the pattern here was uncomfortably clear. Still, Darius adapted. During off-duty hours, he haunted the motor pool, volunteering for maintenance details that other soldiers avoided. He studied technical manuals with the same intensity that others devoted to video games, memorizing specifications for every vehicle on base. Master Sergeant Rodriguez noticed the young private's dedication during routine maintenance rotations. Darius worked with quiet efficiency, asking questions that revealed deeper understanding than his rank suggested. His suggestions were consistently accurate, his observations sharp enough to catch problems before they became expensive failures. But the military hierarchy created invisible barriers. Rodriguez couldn't officially recognize Darius's expertise without challenging the personnel decisions that had placed him in infantry. Informal mentorship was the best he could offer, subtle guidance and carefully worded advice that helped develop skills without drawing unwanted attention. Meanwhile, Captain Sarah Thornton represented everything Darius had never been offered. Military legacy family, automatic respect, doors that opened based on surname rather than competence. Her path through the ranks had been smooth and predictable, marked by assignments that showcased her administrative skills and leadership potential. Sarah had never worked in her father's garage, had never felt the satisfaction of bringing dead machinery back to life, had never learned that competence came in many forms and many colors. Her world was built on assumptions about natural order and proper hierarchy, assumptions that had never been seriously challenged. The contrast between their backgrounds couldn't have been sharper. Darius carried his grandfather's legacy in calloused hands and practical knowledge earned through necessity. Sarah carried her family's expectations and the weight of privilege that felt natural because it had never been questioned. Now those two worlds were about to collide over 15 liters of silent machinery. Darius knelt beside the engine, his father's lessons echoing in his memory like prayers. Around him, the crowd waited for confirmation of their assumptions, for proof that things were exactly as they seemed. He pulled his grandfather's vintage multimeter from his toolkit, brass fittings tarnished but functional, analog dials that had guided 3 generations of Mitchell men through mechanical mysteries. The tool felt warm in his hands, carrying the weight of family tradition and the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what he was doing. The viral video had taken on a life of its own. Marriage Challenge exploded across military social media networks faster than Sarah Thornton could have imagined. Within 30 minutes, her words were being shared by soldiers from Fort Hood to Fort Bragg, each repost carrying the weight of institutional tensions that rarely surfaced so publicly. Sarah stared at her phone screen, watching the view count climb into the thousands. Comments poured in from across the military, some supporting her authority, others questioning her judgment, all of them aware that this had become bigger than a broken engine. She'd painted herself into a corner with no graceful exit. "Ma'am," Specialist Carter approached cautiously, "the base commander wants to see you in his office." Sarah's stomach dropped. Colonel Williams had a reputation for handling delicate situations with surgical precision, and this situation was about as delicate as a live grenade. She glanced at the timer. 3 hours, 42 minutes remaining. "Tell him I'll report after the deadline," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I gave my word publicly. I'll honor it publicly." The crowd had evolved from casual observers to invested spectators. Soldiers lined the motor pool's perimeter 3 deep, phones recording every angle. Someone had set up a makeshift betting pool near the tool cage, with odds shifting every few minutes based on Darius's visible progress. Captain Jennifer Walsh elbowed her way to the front, her intelligence officer instincts screaming warnings. She'd seen enough careers destroyed by viral moments to recognize the dangerous territory Sarah was navigating. Sarah, you need to think about this. There are ways to walk this back without losing face. Walk what back? Sarah's defensive tone carried across the motor pool. I made a fair challenge. When he fails, it proves what we all know. Some people belong in certain positions for good reasons. Walsh winced at the barely concealed racism in her colleague's words. Around them, soldiers shifted uncomfortably, some nodding agreement, others looking away in embarrassment. The crowd was splitting along invisible lines that reflected deeper divisions within the military community. Master Sergeant Rodriguez watched Darius work with growing respect. The young private moved around the engine with practiced confidence, his hands testing connections and checking systems with methodical precision. No wasted motion, no desperate fumbling, just systematic diagnosis that spoke of genuine expertise. Kid knows what he's doing, Rodriguez muttered to Sergeant First Class Williams, who'd joined him near the engine bay. Doesn't matter if the captain's already made up her mind, Williams replied. Politics trumps competence every time. Near the back of the crowd, Dr. Elena Martinez made detailed notes on her tablet. As the base's chief maintenance inspector, she was technically neutral in military disputes, but her job required her to document anything that might affect equipment reliability. This situation definitely qualifies. Martinez had spent 15 years in civilian aviation before taking the military contract, and she'd learned to recognize genuine mechanical talent regardless of its packaging. Darius's examination technique was textbook perfect. Better than textbook, actually, because it incorporated intuitive elements that couldn't be taught from manuals. Chaplain Williams arrived as the timer hit 3 hours, 30 minutes. Word of the marriage challenge had reached his office through multiple channels, and he felt obligated to address the spiritual implications of public vows, even ones made in anger. Captain Thornton, he approached carefully. I understand there may be a ceremony to officiate? Sarah's face flushed red. The presence of the chaplain made everything suddenly, terrifyingly real. She'd assumed Darius would fail, that her challenge was safe hyperbole that would prove her point without consequences. Now she faced the possibility of actually honoring a promise that seemed insane in hindsight. Chaplain, this is just... She started, then stopped. How could she explain that her words weren't meant seriously without admitting that her authority was based on assumptions she couldn't defend? I witnessed your vow, Captain, Chaplain Williams said gently. If the young man succeeds, I'm prepared to officiate immediately. Military promises carry weight, especially public ones. The crowd erupted in excited murmurs. This had escalated beyond entertainment into something approaching legal obligation. Military ceremonies conducted by chaplains carried official recognition, which meant Sarah's challenge had inadvertently created binding stakes she'd never intended. Darius looked up from his work, meeting Sarah's eyes across the motor pool. His expression was calm, almost sympathetic, as if he understood the trap she'd built for herself better than she did. The moment stretched between them, officer and enlisted, privilege and talent, assumption and reality. Ma'am, he said quietly, if you'd prefer to transfer me instead of honoring your word, I understand. But I'm going to fix this engine either way. His words carried no arrogance, no mockery, just quiet confidence that somehow made Sarah's position feel even more precarious. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, sensing the dramatic tension building toward an inevitable conclusion. Colonel Williams appeared at the motor pool entrance, flanked by the base's public affairs officer and legal counsel. His presence sent ripples through the crowd as soldiers snapped to attention. The base commander's arrival transformed this from unofficial spectacle into an official incident. As you were, Williams commanded, but his eyes never left Sarah. The message was clear. This situation had attracted command attention, which meant careers hung in the balance based on how it was resolved. Sarah felt the weight of institutional pressure settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. Too many witnesses, too much documentation, too many variables beyond her control. She'd challenged a private to prove her authority, but now that authority depended entirely on his failure. The timer showed 3 hours, 15 minutes remaining. Plenty of time for everything to go wrong in ways she'd never anticipated. Dr. Martinez approached Darius with a clipboard full of technical specifications. Private, you'll need to document any repairs for my inspection. Safety protocols require... Yes, ma'am, Darius interrupted politely. I understand the requirements. Martinez paused, studying his face. There was something in his expression that reminded her of master mechanics she'd worked with in civilian aviation. Quiet confidence backed by genuine knowledge. She handed him the clipboard with a slight nod that might have been encouragement. The crowd sensed momentum shifting. What had started as entertainment was becoming something more significant, a test of assumptions that went far beyond mechanical repair. Soldiers who'd initially laughed at Darius's chances now watched with genuine curiosity, wondering if they were about to witness something unexpected. Sarah checked the timer again. 3 hours, 12 minutes. Still plenty of time for natural order to reassert itself, for expertise to triumph over misplaced confidence. She just had to wait for reality to prove her right. She had no idea that reality was about to prove her devastatingly wrong. Darius knelt beside the silent Caterpillar C-15 engine like a doctor examining a patient whose symptoms didn't match the obvious diagnosis. While 4 master sergeants had focused on major system failures, fuel pumps, starter motors, electronic control modules, he began his examination at the foundation level, where his father had taught him all mechanical truth resided. "Every engine speaks if you know how to listen," Marcus Mitchell's voice echoed in his son's memory. "Start with the breath, son. Everything else is just noise." The crowd pressed closer as Darius pulled his grandfather's vintage multimeter from his toolkit. The brass instrument looked ancient compared to the digital diagnostic equipment scattered around the motor pool, but its analog dials had guided 3 generations of Mitchell men through mechanical mysteries that stumped newer technology. Master Sergeant Rodriguez watched with growing interest as Darius connected the multimeter to seemingly random points throughout the engine bay. Most mechanics would have started with the obvious culprits: battery voltage, starter current, fuel pressure. But Darius was testing connections that the computerized diagnostic systems had declared within normal parameters. Dr. Martinez positioned herself where she could observe both the work and the crowd's reaction. Her maintenance inspector credentials gave her access to the detailed diagnostic reports that had already been filed. 4 experienced mechanics had spent 12 hours testing every major component, running diagnostics that came back clean across the board. Yet the engine remained stubbornly silent. Sarah Thornton crossed her arms and checked the timer. 2 hours, 47 minutes remaining. Plenty of time for amateur hour to give way to professional reality. She'd seen this before: overconfident soldiers who thought enthusiasm could substitute for expertise, only to learn expensive lessons about the difference between confidence and competence. "Interesting approach," Dr. Martinez murmured as Darius's multimeter detected something the digital systems had missed. The analog needle flickered in a pattern that suggested electrical inconsistency so subtle that computerized diagnostics had dismissed it as normal variation. Darius found it in the pressure sensing circuit, a $12 component buried deep in the engine's electronic control system. The sensor itself, tested within specifications on every digital diagnostic, showed proper voltage and resistance readings that satisfied computer analysis. But his grandfather's multimeter detected something different: microsecond fluctuations in signal timing that created cascading false readings throughout the engine's management system. "Found it," he said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the crowd's murmur. Rodriguez moved closer, squinting at the multimeter's analog display. "What are you seeing, Private?" "Pressure sensors give intermittent false readings," Darius explained, his finger tracing the connection. "Digital diagnostics show it's working because technically it is, but the timing's off by microseconds, just enough to trigger protective shutdowns across multiple systems." The explanation was delivered with clinical precision that surprised everyone within earshot. This wasn't guesswork or lucky discovery. It was a systematic diagnosis that revealed an understanding of electronic systems integration that typically took years to develop. Sarah felt her first twinge of genuine concern. She'd expected fumbling and confusion, the inevitable failure that would validate her assumptions about natural hierarchies and proper assignments. Instead, she was watching methodical competence that made her increasingly uncomfortable. "Even if that's the problem," she called out, her voice carrying a defensive edge, "you still can't fix it without the proper replacement part, and we don't stock that component on base." Darius looked up from his work, meeting her challenge with calm directness. "No, ma'am, we don't, but we have something that'll work better." The second revelation unfolded as Darius moved to the communications equipment storage area, returning with components from a decommissioned radio system. The crowd watched in fascination as he began cross-referencing electrical specifications between automotive and communications equipment. Dr. Martinez pulled out her tablet, following his logic as he explained the adaptation process. Radio frequency modulators and automotive pressure sensors operated on similar electrical principles. Both converted physical phenomena into electronic signals that control systems could interpret. The radio modulator actually has better frequency response than the original sensor, Darius explained as he modified the connections. Military communications equipment is built to tighter tolerances than automotive components. This should eliminate the timing inconsistencies completely. His hands moved with practiced confidence as he rewired the connection, creating an elegant adaptation that transformed communications equipment into automotive control components. The work required understanding of both systems that went far beyond basic mechanical knowledge. Rodriguez shook his head in amazement. "I've been working on engines for 22 years, and I never would have thought of that approach." Around them, the crowd's energy shifted perceptibly. What had started as entertainment was becoming education, as soldiers witnessed genuine innovation under pressure. Even Sarah's most loyal supporters began questioning their assumptions about talent and its various forms. Colonel Williams observed from a respectful distance, making mental notes about personnel assignments and the apparent waste of exceptional talent. His 28 years of military service had taught him to recognize competence regardless of its packaging, and he was watching world-class mechanical engineering disguised as basic repair work. The timer showed 2 hours, 15 minutes remaining as Darius began the third phase of his diagnosis. But this revelation went beyond fixing the immediate problem. It exposed systemic issues that could affect the entire motor pool fleet. "Sir," he addressed Dr. Martinez directly, "the original sensor failure isn't random. It's a design flaw in the military modification package." Martinez leaned forward, her maintenance inspector instincts fully engaged. "Explain." Darius pulled up technical drawings on his tablet, pointing to stress calculations that revealed the source of the problem. The military's performance modifications created vibrational frequencies that gradually degraded the sensor's timing accuracy. The degradation was so slow that it fell below the threshold of routine maintenance detection, but over time it would affect every vehicle in the fleet. "The civilian version of this engine doesn't have the problem because it runs at different RPM ranges," he continued. "But our modifications create harmonic resonance that gradually throws the timing off. This truck was just the first to reach the critical failure threshold. The implications were staggering. Instead of a random component failure, they were looking at a systematic flaw that could ground the entire transport fleet within months. Darius had not only diagnosed the immediate problem, but identified a design issue that threatened operational readiness across multiple installations. Dr. Martinez verified his calculations on her tablet, cross-referencing his stress analysis with manufacturer specifications. The math was flawless, the logic unassailable. A private with supposedly limited technical training had just uncovered an engineering flaw that had escaped detection by defense contractors and military technical specialists. "This needs to go up the chain immediately," she murmured, already composing reports in her mind. "If you're right, we're looking at fleet-wide preventive maintenance requirements." Sarah watched her carefully constructed worldview crumble like a house built on sand. She'd challenged Darius to prove his worth, expecting failure that would confirm her beliefs about natural order and proper hierarchy. Instead, she was witnessing exceptional competence that made her own assumptions look ignorant and dangerous. The crowd had gone completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something historically significant. Phones continued recording, but the earlier atmosphere of entertainment had given way to respectful attention. Even the betting pool had been abandoned as soldiers realized they were watching genuine expertise in action. Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached Darius with visible respect. "Private, where did you learn system integration at this level?" "My father's garage, Sergeant. We worked on everything from city buses to police cruisers. Military vehicles aren't that different from civilian ones. They just have better components and tighter tolerances." The answer was delivered without arrogance or false modesty, just simple acknowledgement of knowledge gained through practical experience. It was the kind of answer that made professional mechanics nod in recognition while making administrative officers uncomfortable about their personnel decisions. Chaplain Williams checked his watch. 2 hours, 8 minutes remaining. He'd initially approached this situation as a potential counseling opportunity, but now he sensed he might be witnessing something that would require official documentation. The transformation in crowd dynamics suggested this had moved beyond personal challenge into institutional significance. Colonel Williams made a decision that would appear in multiple after-action reports. He stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention from every soldier in the motor pool. "Private Mitchell," his voice carried the authority of command, "you have my permission to implement your repair plan. Dr. Martinez will oversee for safety compliance." The official sanction transformed everything. This was no longer unauthorized tinkering. It was command-approved mechanical engineering performed under expert supervision. Sarah felt the last of her control slip away as higher authority validated the competence she'd tried to dismiss. Darius nodded respectfully. "Thank you, sir. I'll need about 90 minutes to complete the modifications and run full system tests. 90 minutes. Less than half the time remaining on Sarah's challenge, delivered with quiet confidence that suggested he could probably do it faster if necessary. The crowd sensed the approaching conclusion, the inevitable moment when assumptions would collide with undeniable reality. Let me continue to reach the target. The final phase of Darius's work proceeded with balletic precision. Every movement seemed choreographed, each tool selected with purpose that spoke of muscle memory developed over years of practice. He worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon, aware that hundreds of eyes were documenting his every action. Dr. Martinez provided official oversight, but her role quickly evolved from supervisor to student. Darius's methodology incorporated engineering principles she'd seen in advanced civilian aviation, adapted for military applications with innovations that impressed her despite 15 years in the field. "You're creating a feedback loop that should prevent future degradation," she observed as he completed the sensor integration. "Yes, ma'am. The radio modulator's frequency response will actually improve with use instead of degrading, should last longer than the engine itself." His explanation revealed an understanding of long-term systems reliability that went far beyond basic repair knowledge. This wasn't just fixing a broken component, it was engineering an improvement that enhanced overall performance while solving the underlying design flaw. The crowd watched in respectful silence as he connected the final components, his movements confident and precise. Even Sarah found herself leaning forward, caught between hoping for his failure and being genuinely impressed by the quality of his work. The timer showed 1 hour, 37 minutes remaining when Darius stood up, wiping his hands on a shop rag that had seen better decades. "Ready for the system test, ma'am," he reported to Dr. Martinez. The motor pool fell silent, except for the distant hum of base operations and the barely audible tick of Sarah's countdown timer. 1 hour, 37 minutes remained, but everyone present sensed that the real countdown had already reached 0. The moment of truth had arrived. Darius stepped back from the Caterpillar C-15 engine, his hands steady despite the weight of every eye in the motor pool focused on his work. Grease stained his uniform and sweat beaded on his forehead from the Carolina heat, but his expression remained calm, the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what he'd accomplished. Dr. Martinez approached with her inspection tablet, running through the safety checklist that military protocol demanded. All connections secure, modifications documented, safety protocols observed. She looked up at Colonel Williams. "Ready for the ignition test, sir." The crowd pressed closer, forming a human amphitheater around the silent engine. Phones appeared like digital flowers, recording what everyone sensed would be a moment replayed thousands of times across social media networks. The air crackled with anticipation thick enough to taste. Sarah Thornton stood frozen 10 feet from the engine, her hand trembling slightly as she held the ignition key. The metal felt cold against her palm despite the afternoon heat. For the first time since issuing her challenge, she fully grasped the consequences of success. If the engine started, she would be legally bound to marry a man she'd publicly humiliated based on racist assumptions. If it failed, she would maintain her authority but face questions about her judgment that a viral video had already started asking. Either outcome carried career-threatening implications. Ma'am? Darius's voice cut through her paralysis. Would you like me to start it? The offer was delivered without mockery or condescension, simple recognition that she might prefer not to personally trigger her own professional downfall. But backing down now would be an admission of cowardice that would follow her for the rest of her career. No, she said, her voice steadier than her nerves. I'll do it. She approached the engine like a condemned prisoner approaching the gallows, aware that her next action would define her future one way or another. The key slid into the ignition with a soft click that somehow echoed across the silent motor pool. Sarah met Darius's eyes across the engine compartment. For just a moment, she saw past her own prejudices to the quiet dignity with which he'd endured her abuse. He could have gloated, could have made her humiliation complete with mockery that would have been well-deserved. Instead, he simply nodded encouragement. If this works, she whispered, but couldn't finish the thought. It will work, ma'am, Darius replied quietly. Trust the engine. Sarah turned the key. The starter motor engaged with a mechanical whine that built for 3 seconds before the Caterpillar C-15 exploded into life with a roar that shook the ground beneath their feet. The sound was magnificent. 15 liters of precisely tuned machinery, breathing with the rhythm of perfect combustion. But this wasn't just any engine start. The C-15 ran smoother than it ever had, its modified sensor system providing feedback so precise that the electronic control module optimized performance in real time. Diagnostic displays showed readings that exceeded factory specifications across every measured parameter. The crowd erupted in spontaneous cheering that could be heard across the base. Soldiers who'd initially bet against Darius now applauded with genuine respect, their assumptions shattered by undeniable competence. The sound rolled across Fort Braxton like thunder, announcing that something significant had just occurred. Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached the engine with his own diagnostic equipment, shaking his head in amazement as he read the performance data. Private, this thing is running better than the day it rolled off the assembly line. Dr. Martinez documented everything on her tablet, her maintenance inspector's eye cataloging improvements that would revolutionize fleet reliability. The sensor modifications have eliminated timing variations completely. Performance is actually enhanced beyond original specifications. Sarah stared at the running engine like she was seeing a ghost. The sound of perfect mechanical harmony mocked every assumption she'd made about talent and its various forms. She'd challenged Darius to prove his worth, expecting failure that would confirm her worldview. Instead, she was witnessing exceptional competence that made her own prejudices look ignorant and dangerous. Colonel Williams stepped forward, his command presence drawing attention from the celebrating crowd. Outstanding work, Private Mitchell. This level of mechanical engineering reflects exceptional talent that deserves recognition. The base commander's public praise carried weight that extended far beyond the motor pool. Official recognition from a full colonel could transform careers, opening doors that had previously been locked by institutional prejudice. Chaplain Williams approached Sarah with ceremony materials he'd retrieved from his office during the repair work. Captain Thornton, I believe you made a promise that requires fulfillment. Reality crashed over Sarah like a cold wave. The viral video had documented her challenge, hundreds of witnesses had heard her words, and military honor demanded that promises be kept regardless of personal consequences. She looked at Darius, who stood quietly beside his Triumph, waiting to see how she would handle the moment her prejudice had created. The silence stretched between Sarah Thornton and Darius Mitchell like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Around them, the motor pool hummed with barely contained energy as hundreds of soldiers waited to see how a captain would honor a promise that had seemed impossible an hour ago. Sarah's mind raced through options that didn't exist. Military honor left no room for clever exits or face-saving alternatives. She'd made a public vow, documented on viral video, witnessed by her chaplain and commanding officer. Captain, Chaplain Williams said gently, your word was given before God and these witnesses. She nodded slowly, understanding that this moment would define her entire military legacy. How she handled the consequences of her prejudice would be remembered long after both their tours ended. Private Mitchell, she said, her voice carrying across the motor pool with surprising steadiness. You've proven exceptional competence under impossible circumstances." She paused, choosing words carefully while hundreds of phones recorded every syllable. "A marriage ceremony conducted in anger serves no one's interests, but honoring the spirit of my promise does." Sarah straightened to attention. "I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to specialist and transfer to the engineering corps where your talents belong." The crowd stirred with surprised murmurs. This wasn't the humiliation they'd expected, but acknowledgement that carried genuine respect. "Furthermore, I'm sponsoring your application for the Advanced Military Engineering Program with full educational benefits." Colonel Williams stepped forward, nodding approval. "Recommendations approved. Specialist Mitchell, report to Dr. Martinez tomorrow for reassignment processing." Darius saluted respectfully. "Thank you, ma'am." Dr. Martinez approached with transfer paperwork. "Specialist, your technical documentation will become standard fleet maintenance protocol. Your modifications will be implemented across all installations." The crowd began dispersing with satisfied murmurs, sensing that justice had been served without destroying careers unnecessarily. Some disappointment lingered among those hoping for more dramatic consequences, but most recognized wisdom in the resolution. Sarah felt the weight of institutional change settling around her. The viral video would follow her career, but perhaps as a lesson in growth rather than a monument to prejudice. The engine continued running with mechanical perfection that would outlast both their military service. 3 weeks after the motor pool incident, Hash Marriage Challenge had become more than viral entertainment. It had become a case study in military leadership programs across the country. The video of Sarah Thornton's racist challenge and Darius Mitchell's triumphant response had been viewed over 2 million times, sparking conversations about institutional bias that military brass could no longer ignore. Sarah discovered the true cost of viral fame when she reported to the Equal Opportunity Office for her mandatory bias training program. The course, typically a routine checkbox for career advancement, had been restructured specifically around her case. She found herself sitting through presentations that dissected her own words frame by frame, analyzing the institutional prejudices that had shaped her assumptions. Captain Thornton's challenge reveals unconscious bias patterns that exist throughout military culture, the instructor explained to a classroom full of officers. Her case demonstrates how quickly personal prejudice can become public liability in the digital age. The humiliation was thorough but educational. Sarah was forced to confront not just her own racism, but the systematic advantages that had made it possible. Her promotion timeline was quietly extended, giving her additional time to demonstrate genuine leadership growth before advancing to major. Meanwhile, Specialist Darius Mitchell had become the motor pool's unofficial celebrity. His Mitchell method for sensor adaptation had been implemented across 3 military installations, saving the Department of Defense an estimated $2.3 million in component replacement costs. Technical manuals now included his innovations as standard procedure. The Pentagon's Efficiency Review Board took notice. Within 6 weeks, Darius received orders to report to the Army's Advanced Engineering Research Facility in Maryland, where civilian contractors with PhD credentials would be learning techniques he'd developed in his father's Detroit garage. Dr. Martinez compiled her final report on the incident with satisfaction that went beyond professional duty. Her recommendations led to policy changes that prioritized mechanical aptitude testing over traditional personnel assignments. Talented soldiers would no longer be wasted in positions that ignored their capabilities. The Mitchell case demonstrates systemic failure in talent recognition, her report concluded. Military effectiveness depends on matching skills to assignments regardless of demographic factors. The institutional changes rippled outward like stones thrown into still water. Fort Braxton implemented new protocols requiring technical interviews for all mechanical assignments. Other installations requested copies of the new procedures. The Army quietly began reviewing personnel files, looking for other cases where talent might have been overlooked. Master Sergeant Rodriguez found himself assigned to a new talent recognition task force, identifying soldiers whose capabilities exceeded their current assignments. His first recommendation was Private Johnson, whose electronics knowledge had been dismissed because he didn't look like engineer material. The viral video's impact extended beyond military circles. Civilian automotive forums began discussing Darius's sensor adaptation technique, with professional mechanics praising innovations they wished they'd thought of first. Detroit newspapers ran feature stories about the local hero who'd proven that excellence could emerge from any neighborhood. Sarah's most difficult moment came when she received orders to attend sensitivity training at the same facility where Darius was conducting engineering research. The irony wasn't lost on either of them when they encountered each other in the facility cafeteria. "Specialist," she said formally, unsure how to navigate the encounter. "Ma'am?" he replied with the same respectful dignity he'd shown throughout their confrontation. They sat together awkwardly, the viral video playing silently on cafeteria television screens that seemed determined to remind them of their shared history. "I've learned things I should have known years ago," Sarah said finally. "We all learn when we're ready, ma'am," Darius replied. "The important thing is that we do learn." The conversation was brief but healing, two people finding common ground in the wreckage of assumptions that had nearly destroyed both their careers. 6 months later, Specialist Darius Mitchell stood before a packed auditorium at the Army Engineering Research Center, delivering a presentation on adaptive mechanical systems to an audience that included Pentagon officials and defense contractors. His father's socket wrench set was displayed in the base museum, honored as tools that changed military maintenance forever. Captain Sarah Thornton completed her bias training program and requested assignment to diversity and inclusion initiatives. Her first-hand experience with the cost of prejudice made her an effective advocate for institutional change. The viral video that could have ended her career became the foundation for meaningful growth. The Caterpillar C-15 engine still runs at Fort Braxton, its modified sensors performing flawlessly after thousands of operational hours. A small plaque near the motor pool reads, "Excellence has no color. Specialist D. Mitchell, 2024. Sometimes the most powerful challenges force us to see what was always there. Have you ever underestimated someone's hidden potential? There's a detail only sharp-eyed viewers will notice at minute 247 that reveals everything. Share this story about talent transcending prejudice, and subscribe for more stories about heroes who prove that greatness comes from unexpected places.
The story you heard today wasn't cleaned up. It was told exactly as it happened. At Black Voices Uncut, we believe that's the only way truth can live. If you felt something, hit like, comment, and your reaction, and subscribe. Every week, we bring you voices that refuse to be silenced.